2 weeks ago, I caught my wife reading something called the Female Delusion Calculator on her phone. At first, I thought it was some random internet nonsense. Man, was I wrong. That little discovery would become the beginning of the most eye-opening 3 weeks of my marriage. It started innocent enough. She'd scroll through her phone during dinner, occasionally letting out these little, sounds like she was discovering the secrets of the universe. When I asked what was so fascinating, she'd just say nothing important and keep reading. But I could see the gears turning in her head. The first red flag came during our usual weekend grocery trip. We're standing in the cereal aisle when she suddenly stops and looks at me with this evaluating stare. "You know," she says, "I've been doing some research about relationships and standards." I'm thinking she found some marriage advice blog or something. Apparently, most women settle for men who aren't really high value. High value. That was the first time I heard her use that term. I raised an eyebrow and asked what exactly made a man high value, according to her newfound wisdom. She pulled out her phone and started listing criteria like she was reading from a manual. Height, income, car, house ownership, social status. The works. "So what you're telling me," I said, grabbing a box of cereal, "is that after 5 years of marriage, you've decided I'm not high value enough?" She backtracked quickly, saying it wasn't about me specifically, just general observations. But the damage was done. I could see she was measuring me against some imaginary standard she'd found online. The next few days, her behavior shifted completely. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about successful men and how they provide better lifestyles. During our usual evening shows, she'd point out male actors and comment on their provider qualities. It was like living with a completely different person. The breaking point came when she suggested I should level up my career and social circle. She'd been reading about feminine energy and how women should inspire their men to become better versions of themselves. Except her version of inspiration felt more like constant criticism wrapped in self-help terminology. I decided to do my own research. Turns out, the Female Delusion Calculator is this tool that supposedly shows women how statistically rare their ideal man requirements are. The problem is, instead of helping women adjust unrealistic expectations, it was feeding into this idea that they should hold out for some mythical perfect guy. My wife had fallen down a rabbit hole of content about knowing your worth and never settling. Every video, every article, every social media post was reinforcing this idea that she deserved better than what she had. And what she had was me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman who'd been happy in our marriage for years, suddenly convinced by strangers on the internet that she was living below her standards. She'd gone from being my partner to being my judge, jury, and apparently, my life coach. When I tried to address it directly, she got defensive. "I'm just trying to grow as a person," she said. "Maybe you should try it too instead of being intimidated by my self-improvement." Self-improvement. That's what she called questioning everything about our life together. The final straw came when she started talking about taking a break to reassess her options. She'd been reading about women who left their husbands and found better partners. Success stories, she called them. Stories of women who refused to settle and ended up with their dream men. I looked at her across the dinner table, phone in hand, still scrolling through her delusion-feeding content. "You know what?" I said, setting down my fork. "I think you're right. You should definitely explore all your options." The smile that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know. She thought she'd won some kind of victory, but what she didn't realize was that I'd already started making my own plans. If she wanted to live in a fantasy world where she was too good for our marriage, I was going to give her exactly what she asked for: the chance to see how that delusion played out in real life. 2 weeks of reading about female delusion had convinced her she was settling. Week 3 would show her what settling actually looked like. The next morning, she woke up with a different energy, like she'd been given permission to completely reimagine our relationship. Over coffee, she casually mentioned that she'd been evaluating our dynamic and had some thoughts about improvements we could make. I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. "Sounds like you've already made up your mind about what needs changing." She pulled out a notebook, an actual notebook where she'd been writing down her thoughts. "I've been doing some calculations," she said, flipping through pages of notes. "Based on my research, I think we need to establish some new standards for this relationship." I almost laughed. She was treating our marriage like a business proposal. "Standards," I repeated. "What kind of standards are we talking about?" She started reading from her list. Date nights had to be at restaurants that cost at least a certain amount per person. I needed to upgrade my wardrobe to reflect success. We should be taking vacations to places that were Instagram-worthy. Social media presence needed improvement because high-value couples document their lifestyle. You've been married to me for 5 years, I said, leaning back in my chair. If these standards were so important, why are you bringing them up now? Because I didn't know better then, she replied without missing a beat. I was operating from a scarcity mindset. Now I understand what I'm actually worth. What she was worth, not what we were worth together. What she was worth as an individual who happened to be married to someone who apparently wasn't meeting her newfound requirements. The conversations became increasingly one-sided. She'd talk about couples she'd seen online who had figured it out, men who treated their women like queens, who provided effortlessly, who never made their wives question their value. Meanwhile, I was supposed to sit there and take notes on how to become this imaginary perfect husband. When I pointed out that these social media couples were probably showing their highlight reels, not their real lives, she dismissed it. Successful men don't make excuses, she said. They find ways to make things happen. The real test came when she started making demands disguised as suggestions. I think it would be good for us if you joined that upscale gym downtown, she said one evening. You know, network with more successful people. When I mentioned that I was perfectly happy with my current gym routine, she sighed dramatically. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said. You're not growth-minded. High-value men are always looking for ways to improve themselves and their circumstances. I decided to play along. You're absolutely right, I said. I should definitely be more growth-minded. In fact, I think I should start evaluating everything in my life to make sure it's adding value. The way her face lit up, she thought she'd finally gotten through to me. But her excitement faded when I started applying her logic back to her. So if we're talking about standards and value, I said, what exactly are you bringing to this relationship that justifies all these new requirements? She wasn't ready for that question. Her research had focused entirely on what men should provide, not on what women should contribute. When pressed, she talked about feminine energy and inspiring her man to be better. Translation: her job was to have opinions about my performance while I did the actual work of meeting her standards. The breaking point came during dinner with friends. She spent the entire evening comparing me unfavorably to other husbands at the table. He just bought her a new car, she said about one couple, and they're going to Europe next month. Every comment was a not-so-subtle hint about how I was falling short. On the drive home, I finally addressed it directly. You seem pretty unhappy with what you've got, I said. Maybe you should explore what else is out there. She turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty. But then her phone buzzed with another notification from her online communities, and the moment passed. Maybe I should, she said, scrolling through her phone. I deserve someone who appreciates what I bring to the table. I nodded slowly. You absolutely do. And I deserve someone who appreciates what I bring to the table too. That night, she stayed up late on her phone, probably getting validation from strangers about how she was finally standing up for herself. Meanwhile, I was in the other room, making some phone calls of my own. If she wanted to play the game of evaluating options, I was going to make sure she understood all the rules. By morning, she'd convinced herself that she was taking control of her life. What she didn't realize was that I was about to show her what taking control actually looked like. The third week started with her announcing that she was going to take some space to reassess things. She'd been talking to her online support groups about the importance of maintaining your options and not settling for mediocrity. Apparently, the consensus was that she should explore what else was available before committing to improving our relationship. Space, I repeated, setting down my morning coffee. What kind of space are we talking about? She had it all planned out. She was going to stay at her sister's place for a few days, maybe go out with some friends, experience life from a different perspective. She'd been reading about women who took breaks from their relationships and came back with renewed appreciation or clarity about what they really wanted. And what if the clarity you get is that you want something completely different? I asked. She shrugged with this casual confidence that told me she'd already gamed this out in her head. Then we'll both know where we stand. What she really meant was that she expected me to sit at home, panicking about losing her, while she went out and confirmed that I was the best she could do. It was a power play wrapped in self-help language. Sounds like a plan, I said, taking another sip of coffee. When are you leaving? She blinked. That wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed for. "You're okay with this?" "You're a grown woman," I replied. "If you need to explore your options to figure out what you want, who am I to stop you?" The confusion on her face was priceless. She'd expected me to fight for her, to beg her to stay, to promise I'd change. Instead, I was practically holding the door open for her. She packed her bags that afternoon, making a big show of it, sighing dramatically, taking her time, waiting for me to crack and ask her to reconsider. But I just went about my normal routine, occasionally offering to help carry her things to the car. "I'll call you in a few days," she said, standing in the doorway with her suitcase. "No rush," I replied. "Take all the time you need." That evening, she posted on social media about choosing yourself and not settling for less than you deserve. Her friends immediately flooded the comments with support, telling her how brave she was for prioritizing her happiness. Meanwhile, I was having the most peaceful evening I'd had in weeks. No passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. No lectures about high-value men. No constant comparison to other couples. Just quiet. But the peace didn't last long. By the second day, she started texting. Nothing direct, just casual messages about what she was doing, where she was going, who she was meeting. She was painting a picture of this amazing life she was living without me, waiting for me to get jealous or worried. Having dinner at that new steakhouse downtown, she texted with a photo of her meal. "The one you said was too expensive." I responded with a simple "looks good. Hope you're enjoying it." The texts became more frequent and more pointed. She was meeting interesting people and having deep conversations about life goals. She was remembering what it felt like to be appreciated for who she was. Each message was designed to make me feel like I was missing out, like she was discovering this whole world of possibilities that didn't include me. The problem was, I wasn't missing out. I was finally getting a break from her constant criticism and demands. By the fourth day, her sister called me. "She's been crying every night," she said. "Whatever you two are going through, maybe you should work it out." "She's the one who wanted space," I replied. "I'm just giving her what she asked for." "But she expected you to fight for her," her sister said. "She thought you'd try to win her back." I laughed. "Win her back from what? She hasn't gone anywhere. She's just camping out at your place, waiting for me to panic." That night, she came home, not to reconcile, but to pick up a few things. She walked through the house like she was surveying property she used to own, making comments about changes I'd made in her absence. "You rearranged the living room," she said. "I did," I replied, not looking up from my book. "Turns out I like it better this way." She stood there for a moment, waiting for me to ask about her week away, about the people she'd met, about the realizations she'd had. When I didn't take the bait, she tried a different approach. "I've been thinking about what I want," she said, "and I think I need someone who's going to fight for me, who's going to show me that I matter." I looked up from my book. "You matter," I said, "but I'm not going to fight for someone who's already decided I'm not good enough. If you want to leave, leave. If you want to stay, stay. But I'm done playing games." She left that night more frustrated than when she'd arrived. Her grand gesture of independence was supposed to make me desperate to win her back. Instead, it had shown both of us exactly how things worked when she wasn't around to constantly remind me of my shortcomings. The next morning, I got a text. "We need to talk." I replied, "Whenever you're ready to have a real conversation instead of a negotiation, let me know." By the end of the week, she was back. Not because she'd realized I was amazing, but because her exploration hadn't gone the way she'd planned. The high-value men she'd been reading about weren't exactly lining up to date a married woman having a quarter-life crisis. But she came back with even more demands, more conditions, more standards that needed to be met. She doubled down on her delusion, convinced that the problem wasn't her expectations, but my failure to meet them. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with her coming to her senses. This was going to end with me showing her what reality looked like when the game stopped working. She walked back into the house expecting to find me exactly where she'd left me, waiting, hoping, ready to negotiate. What she found instead was a man who'd spent the last week remembering what life felt like without constant judgment and manipulation. "We need to establish some ground rules," she announced, dropping her bags in the entryway like she was moving back into a hotel. "If this is going to work, there need to be some serious changes." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been working on something that had nothing to do with her drama. "Ground rules," I repeated. "That's interesting. What makes you think you're in a position to set ground rules?" She pulled out her phone and started reading from what looked like a prepared statement. "First, I need transparency about your finances. I should have access to all accounts so I can see where the money's going. Second, social activities need to be planned together. No more of this hermit lifestyle. Third, we need to establish a timeline for major improvements. Career advancement, lifestyle upgrades, the works. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You leave for a week to explore your options, and you come back with a list of demands for me to meet. They're not demands, she said, scrolling through her notes. They're standards. Healthy relationship standards based on what successful couples actually do. And where exactly did you get these standards? From the same online communities that convinced you our 5-year marriage was suddenly inadequate. She got defensive immediately. I've been talking to people who understand what real partnership looks like. People who don't settle for mediocrity. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice calm. Here's what real partnership looks like. Partners don't leave to explore other options and then return with ultimatums. Partners don't spend weeks researching how to manipulate their spouse into becoming someone else. And partners definitely don't treat their marriage like a business transaction that can be renegotiated whenever they feel like it. She wasn't ready for that level of directness. Her online support groups had prepared her for a desperate husband who would agree to anything to keep her. They hadn't prepared her for someone who'd refuse to play the game entirely. You're being defensive, she said, falling back on her script. This is exactly the kind of closed-minded thinking that's been holding us back. No, I replied. What's been holding us back is your sudden decision that everything we built together isn't good enough because strangers on the internet told you that you deserve better. That's when she played her ace card. Maybe I do deserve better, she said, watching my face for a reaction. Maybe I deserve someone who's actually excited about growing together instead of fighting against every suggestion I make. I nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're absolutely right. You deserve someone who's excited about meeting your standards. And I deserve someone who's excited about the life we already built together. The confidence started draining from her face. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending that this is about self-improvement or healthy relationship standards. This is about you getting bored with reality and deciding that I should transform into some fantasy version of a husband to keep you entertained. She tried to pivot, sensing that her strategy wasn't working. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to become the best version of yourself. The best version of myself according to who? You? Or the people online who don't even know us? She pulled out her phone again, probably looking for backup from her digital cheerleaders. I've been getting a lot of support from people who understand what I'm going through. They all say the same thing. A woman shouldn't have to settle for a man who isn't willing to level up for her. Level up, I repeated. And what exactly have you been doing to level up for me? Besides making lists of everything I need to change. She blinked. That question had never occurred to her. Her research had been entirely focused on what she should demand from me, not on what she should contribute to earn those demands. I bring emotional support, she said finally. I inspire you to be better. You mean you criticize me constantly and call it inspiration? I'm trying to help you reach your potential. No, you're trying to turn me into some imaginary person who doesn't exist so you can live out some fantasy you saw on social media. She put her phone away and tried a different approach. Look, I love you, but I need to know that you're committed to growing with me. If you're not willing to work on yourself, then maybe we're not compatible anymore. There it was, the threat she'd been building up to. The ultimatum disguised as concern. Change or lose me. I sat back down and reopened my laptop. You know what? I think you're right. We're probably not compatible anymore. She froze. What? You heard me. We're not compatible. You want a husband who'll jump through hoops to prove his worth. I want a wife who values what we already have. Those are two different things. She stood there for a moment, processing that her nuclear option had just been defused. You don't mean that. I absolutely mean that. You've spent 3 weeks telling me in every way possible that I'm not good enough. Well, congratulations. You've convinced me that you're not good enough either. The next few hours were a masterclass in someone realizing their power play had backfired spectacularly. She tried every tactic in her playbook. Tears, anger, bargaining, threatening to leave again. But I'd already made my decision. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. You're going to decide if you want to be married to me or married to some fantasy version of me. If it's the fantasy version, then you need to leave and go find him. If it's me, then we throw away the phones, ignore the online advice, and start over. But I'm done being evaluated and graded like some kind of project. She spent the night on the couch, probably texting her support groups about this unexpected turn of events. Meanwhile, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, she was waiting for me in the kitchen with her suitcase packed. "I think I need more time," she said. "Take all the time you need," I replied, pouring my coffee. "But understand that this isn't a negotiation anymore. It's a choice." 3 days later, she called. Not texted, called. That told me everything I needed to know about how her second round of exploration was going. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice different than it had been in weeks. Less demanding, more uncertain. "Maybe we should talk." "I'm listening," I replied, not making it easy for her. "Can I come over? I think this is something we should discuss in person." When she arrived an hour later, she looked like someone who'd been having a very different week than she'd planned. The confident woman who'd walked out with her ultimatums had been replaced by someone who was starting to understand the difference between fantasy and reality. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she started, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "And I realized that maybe I've been approaching this wrong." "Wrong how?" She took a deep breath. "I think I got caught up in all this online advice and lost sight of what we actually have." I leaned back in my chair. "What we have, or what you decided we didn't have. That's not fair," she said, but without the fire she'd had before. "I was just trying to make things better for us, by threatening to leave unless I transformed into someone else." She looked down at her hands. "I never said I was going to leave. You didn't have to say it. Every conversation, every demand, every comparison to other men was you telling me I wasn't enough. That was the threat hanging over everything." She tried to reframe it. "I was trying to inspire you to reach your potential. No, you were trying to manipulate me into becoming your fantasy husband because you'd convinced yourself that what we had wasn't good enough." The silence stretched between us. Finally, she looked up. "Okay, maybe I was wrong about some things. But can't we just move forward? Can't we work on this together?" "Work on what together?" "Our marriage was fine until you decided it wasn't. We were happy until you let strangers on the internet convince you that happiness wasn't enough." She pulled out her phone, and for a moment, I thought she was going to start reading from her support groups again. Instead, she set it face down on the table. "I deleted the apps," she said quietly. "All of them. The forums, the social media groups, everything. And I realized that maybe I was getting bad advice." I almost laughed. "Maybe? You spent 3 weeks treating our marriage like a failed business venture based on advice from people who don't know us, don't know our history, and probably can't maintain their own relationships." She flinched. It wasn't just the online stuff. I was feeling unfulfilled, like we were just going through the motions. "So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to research how to rebuild me from scratch. I thought if you just made some changes, we could both be happier." "Changes to me? What changes were you planning to make?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The question had caught her off guard again. "I was supporting you," she said finally. "I was trying to help you become better, by constantly criticizing everything about our life and comparing me to other men." "That's not what I was doing." I stood up and grabbed a notebook from the counter. "Actually, it is exactly what you were doing. Want to hear some highlights?" I flipped through pages where I'd been documenting her comments. "You're not growth-minded like successful men. You should network with higher-value people. You need to upgrade your lifestyle to reflect success. You don't provide the way a real man should." Her face went pale as I read back her own words. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" "Because from where I was sitting, it sounded like you were building a case for why I was inadequate." She started crying, but they weren't the manipulative tears from before. These were different. "I messed up," she said. "I know I messed up." "You didn't mess up," I replied, closing the notebook. "You made a choice. You chose to value the opinions of strangers over your own experience. You chose to believe that our marriage was a problem that needed solving instead of a relationship that needed nurturing." "But I can fix this," she said, reaching across the table. "I can change." "Change into what?" "The person you were before you decided I wasn't good enough. Because that person was happy with what we had. I can be that person again." I sat back down and looked at her directly. "Here's the problem. I don't trust that person anymore. Because now I know that if you get bored, if you start feeling unfulfilled, if someone online tells you that you deserve better, you'll throw away everything we built together." "That's not true." "It's exactly true. You spent weeks planning how to change me instead of 5 minutes asking if I was happy with how things were. You assumed that because you were dissatisfied, the problem must be with me." She wiped her eyes. What do you want me to do? How do I fix this? You don't fix this. You live with the consequences of it. What does that mean? I leaned forward. It means that you broke something that can't be unbroken. You took our marriage and turned it into a performance evaluation. You took 5 years of partnership and decided it was all inadequate because it didn't match some online fantasy. But I realize now that I was wrong. You realize now that your fantasy didn't work out the way you planned. There's a difference. She sat there, finally understanding that her apology wasn't going to reset everything back to how it was before. The damage was done, and we both knew it. So what happens now? She asked. I looked at her for a long moment. Now you get to live with the delusion alone, just like you wanted. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later. She tried calling, texting, even showing up at my door, but the conversation was over. She'd made her choice when she decided our marriage needed fixing instead of appreciating. Her family called me. Her friends reached out. Everyone wanted to know if we could work things out. The answer was simple. You can't work things out with someone who fundamentally believes you're not good enough. 3 months later, I ran into her sister at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure if she should say something. How is she doing? I asked, genuinely curious. Her sister sighed. Not great. She's been on dating apps for 2 months. Keeps talking about finding someone who meets her standards. Any luck? The guys who meet her financial requirements aren't interested in anything serious. The guys who want something serious don't meet her requirements. She's stuck in this weird loop. I nodded. It was exactly what I'd expected. The female delusion calculator hadn't been wrong about the statistics. High-value men who checked all her boxes weren't looking for women who brought nothing but demands to the table. She asks about you, her sister continued. Wants to know if you're dating anyone. What do you tell her? That you seem happy. I was happy, happier than I'd been in months. No more walking on eggshells, no more constant evaluation, no more feeling like I had to prove my worth every day. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just live without judgment. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, she sent one last text. I made a mistake. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a while, remembering the woman who'd been so sure that she deserved better. Now she was learning what better actually cost. I typed back. You didn't make a mistake. You got exactly what you wanted. The chance to find someone who meets all your standards. She replied immediately, but I miss what we had. What we had wasn't good enough for you, remember? You spent weeks explaining that to me. I was wrong. No, you were honest. For the first time in our marriage, you told me exactly how you felt about our life together. I'm grateful for that honesty. The conversation ended there. She'd finally gotten her delusion, and now she had to live with it. A year later, I heard through mutual friends that she was still single, still searching for that perfect high-value man who would check all her boxes. Meanwhile, I'd started dating someone who appreciated what I brought to the table instead of constantly measuring it against impossible standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. My ex-wife had read about female delusion for 2 weeks, spent 1 week living it, and now got to experience it permanently. She'd traded a real relationship for a fantasy and discovered that fantasies don't keep you warm at night. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is give them exactly what they ask for. She'd asked for the chance to find better. I gave her that chance. Now she knows what better actually looks like, a lot lonelier than what she had.